Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our PI and coverage under D&C with claims examples. Our presenters today are myself, Jason Tomarini, the State Manager from Western Australia, Kimberly Macy, State Manager from South Australia, Chris Milton, Senior Underwriter Financial Lines, New South Wales, Rebecca Mint, Senior Underwriter and General Liability Financial Lines in Queensland, and also with a big thank you to Steve Taylor, Financial Lines Underwriter in Victoria, and Jaden Frankenfeld, Underwriter South Australia. We hope today's presentation will assist you to better understand the cover D&C provides and the information required to receive a quote. During today's session, we'll highlight some key differences in coverage, run through some claims examples, and talk about what underwriters look at when quoting. The aim is so you can comfortably discuss whether your clients require D&C and to highlight the importance of the insurance product for clients of all shapes and sizes. Also, hopefully assist you in asking the right questions to prevent us coming back and asking for more. We like providing quick solutions to our clients so that you can do the same for yours. Design and construct professional indemnity insurance is often confused to those who do not deal with the product every day. Beck, if we can go back a slide, please. Before we start the session today, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar will be recorded and the link will be sent to you in the next couple of days. Alternatively, it will be on our website by the end of the week. During the session, we invite your comments and questions. Please select the question and answer section on your screens. Throughout the session, we will have a couple of polling questions with Slido. Once the question pops up, you can add in your answer. If you are having issues with sound, please try to disconnect and reconnect, or use the call-in number provided in the audio options on your screen. If you cannot see the presentation, please make sure you are using the WebEx app and not a browser, or you are outside your company server. In regards to CPD and CIP points, a certificate will also be emailed to you and you can claim the points online on either the NEBA or ANZIF websites. The next page, please. So a common question raised by yourselves as brokers when discussing D&C is, why do I need a D&C policy when I can get a straight engineer's architect's policy for lesser premiums? Go to the next slide. So what's the difference between D&C and standard PI? Professional indemnity insurance is no longer just the traditional professionals like accountants, solicitors, consulting engineers and architects. Today, many other entities need professional indemnity insurance and standard PI policies are not suitable. Berkeley Insurance Australia's Design and Construct Professionals Insurance Policy is a professional indemnity insurance policy, but specifically designed to cater to entities that perform the physical construction or manufacture of products, goods, structures, or buildings, as well as having responsibility for the provision of any design, advice, or other professional services relating to those works. The policy provides protection for an insured against claims for financial loss arising out of an act, error, or omission in the course of their professional activities and duties. Who needs a D&C policy? Any professional who provides designs or advice and is involved or responsible for the physical construction should consider a D&C PI policy. A standard PI policy is appropriate for a professional who purely gives or supplies designs, but once that entity becomes responsible for the actual construction of a building, they are better off with a D&C PI policy. A large proportion of contracts for construction require design and construct entities to maintain their own PI insurance policies. More importantly, customers are becoming increasingly aware of the rights to pursue construction entities where they believe those entities are responsible for loss they have suffered in relation to poor or inadequate design. Claims for financial loss can be made against insured for a number of reasons, including failure to exercise your professional duty, breaching misleading and deceptive conduct provisions of the consumer legislation, breaches of intellectual property rights, failure to warn. Significant legal costs and expenses can be incurred even in cases where the claim made against an insured is unfounded. Pass on to Kimberly.
Thanks, Jace. So I'm going to touch on some activities and duties. So a traditional PI policy will have a specific business description based on their individual business activities. For an example, an architect. However, a design and construct policy has a broad definition of activities and duties that has been specifically designed to respond to the varied professional services that a D&C contractor may be responsible for. The Berkeley D&C policy has a broad definition of activities and duties that has been specifically designed to respond to the varied professional services that a D&C contractor may be responsible for. The coverage under a D&C PI policy is governed by the activities and duties in the policy, which is defined as the provision of the following services by any persons qualified as architects, engineers, or surveyors, or any other persons who have a minimum level of 5 years experience in undertaking the following services: design, drafting, technical calculation, technical design specification, inspection, project management, construction management, feasibility studies, programming, time flow management, surveying, and or the provision of advice or technical information, such as additional services declared to and expressly agreed in writing by us. Any entity that is involved in the design and construct activities with responsibility for the provision of any advice, design, or any other professional services in conjunction with the provision of physical construction, erection, installation, or maintenance activities should consider purchasing a D&C PI policy. Entities that are responsible for construction only can be held liable for failure to warn. Often this exposure is not covered under a public and products liability policy. A major difference between the standard PI policy and a D&C PI policy is that D&C policies don't contain a broad supply of goods exclusion. Standard PI policies exclude any claim in connection with the sale, manufacture, installation, construction, alteration, repair, servicing, or treating of any goods or products sold, distributed, or supplied by the insured. So if an insured supplies goods or is in any way connected with the physical construction works, then the claim in connection with that construction is not going to be covered. Berkeley's underwriting rule is, if they perform any physical work, then we must quote under a D&C PI policy. It's always important to understand that not within the definition of the activities and duties, the definition shall not include performance or supervision, where such supervision would normally be undertaken by a building contractor, of construction management, manufacture, assembly, installation, erection, maintenance, or physical alteration of buildings, goods, products, or property, or environmental protection, work health and safety, or industrial relation matters, which would normally be overseen by a building contractor. Thanks, Beck. Next slide. So I'm just going to touch on some key areas of coverage under the D&C policy. Civil liability in the provision of your professional services, defined as we will indemnify the insured against civil liability for compensation, including the claimant's legal costs and expenses arising from any claim first made against the insured during the period of insurance arising out of a breach of professional duty by the insured in the exercise and conduct of the activities and duties. Faulty designs, inaccurate advice. It's pretty self-explanatory and covered by the definition of activities and duties. Mitigation costs. Direct costs and expenses incurred by the insured in taking action to rectify or mitigate the effects of matter that would otherwise result in a claim covered under the policy. This is sublimited to $50,000. Defence costs. So we will also indemnify the insured for defence costs where such costs have been incurred with our prior written consent. Inquiry costs. We will indemnify the insured for the reasonable and necessary legal costs and expenses incurred for representation of the insured at any regulatory inquiry or other proceeding, which is sublimited to $250,000. Contractual liability. For liability the insured incurs under an indemnity or hold harmless term of a contract, to the extent that such liability results from the insured's performance of professional services. Please note, though, that we do not extend cover to full contract liability and is limited to what is permitted by tort law. Breaches of intellectual property rights. We will only provide coverage for unintentional breaches of intellectual property rights. Breaches of consumer legislation. Misleading or deceptive conduct, making of a false or misleading representation, but must not be intentional. For any examples on this, please refer to the National Consumer Credit Protection Act 2009 Fair Trading Act. Other features of the D&C PI policy include principals indemnity. So cover under your Berkeley D&C PI policy extends to your principals where a claim is made directly against them arising from your activities and duties. And bodily injury and property damage. The D&C PI policy provides coverage for claims for bodily injury and property damage where the claim has arisen from the conduct of activities and duties of the insured. This coverage is normally excluded in its entirety or is provided where it arises from a breach of professional duty. And over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Kimberly. So whenever we do these webinars or events, a lot of the feedback we get is always around claims examples. So today I'm going to talk through some claims examples throughout the presentation. As we know, claims examples give a great insight into real life situations. And we'll be looking at examples of both covered and uncovered claims, just to give you an idea of the considerations that go with D&C claims. So as you can see on the screen there, our first example coincides with our first Slido survey question for today. So hopefully everyone should have the Slido question on the right-hand side of their screen popping up right now. There we go. So the question is whether this claim was a covered or declined claim. So I'll give you some claim examples or details of the claim, sorry, and then you vote as to whether you feel it was covered or declined. So the insured was a leading provider of access way equipment. They're an established business of around 10 years and provided importing, sales and installation of automatic and roller door solutions. For this particular project, they were engaged by the third party to design and install a large curtain roller door at the third party's warehouse. The project consisted of 3 15 by 15 meter curtain roller doors. Following the installation of the roller doors, a failure occurred, resulting in one of the roller door curtains falling from the open position at the elevated height of 15 meters to the closed position at ground level, causing damage. An engineering investigation was undertaken, and it was alleged that the design of the bracket holding the curtain was not sufficient for the curtain load weight, resulting in the roller door falling. In addition to the roller door falling, the 2 additional roller doors also needed to be removed and replaced. As part of the engineering design, the insured was responsible for providing the necessary engineering and calculations and design plans with respect to the relevant bracket. And this is where the design failure occurred. So can we get everyone to cast their vote on whether they felt that was a covered or declined claim? Okay, I can see the numbers ticking up there. That's great. Just give it a few more seconds. All right, I think we have the majority of people have voted now. So as we can see there, 93-ish% have said that that was a covered claim, and those people would be correct. The claim related to an error in the design and specification of the bracket, and so therefore indemnity was granted under our Berkeley D&C wording, and the matter was ultimately settled for approximately $100,000, and that included costs and expenses. So thank you for your votes in the first of our 2 Slido surveys. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so claim example 2 was a matter where indemnity wasn't granted. So we're just going to give you examples of both sides of the fence. The insured was an experienced home builder operating for over 20 years. They built and constructed residential homes, including custom homes, as well as provide various types of home improvements. In July of 2015, the claimant entered into a contract with the insured to build a 2-story dwelling, and the property was completed in 2016. In July of 2019, the claimant lodged a complaint with the Building Commission in relation to the property construction and the insured's building works. For the purposes of the claim, this was deemed the first complaint. The first complaint was supported by a building inspection report commissioned by the claimant. However, shortly after, the first complaint was subsequently withdrawn by the client. Later in 2019, the insured took out a policy with Berkeley Australia, incepting a D&C annual policy from the 30th of September 2019. On the 30th of August 2020, so around a month before the expiry of the policy, the claimant lodged a second complaint to the Building Commission, deemed the second complaint. The issues raised in the second complaint were substantially similar to the issues raised in the first complaint. Then on the 28th of September 2020, so 2 days before expiry, the insured notified Berkeley of a potential circumstance that related to the second complaint. So as mentioned at the start of this example, the indemnity wasn't granted on this claim, and it fell outside of cover for the following reasons. The insured first became aware of circumstances that may lead to a claim in July 2019, which was the first complaint, as the claim was not made and notified during the policy period, being that the client knew of a potential circumstance prior to the inception date of the policy with Berkeley. It fell outside of insuring clause 1.1. And the second reason, the previously known claims exclusion also applied in this instance, as the first complaint and the building report would have put the insured on notice that there was a potential circumstance that may lead to a claim against them. So that's a really good example of the importance of notifying as quickly and as early as is possible. So I'm now going to throw over to Rebecca to talk about some underwriting considerations.
Thanks for that, Chris, and thanks for those claims examples. So yes, I'm going to be looking at what we as underwriters are looking for when we're actually determining the difference between placing a client on a normal PI wording or a D&C wording. So here on the slide, we have an example from a client who has noted their activities as being an interior designer, and they've also completed our architect's PI proposal form. So everything looks quite normal, but something is setting off alarm bells here to the underwriter, and should also set off alarm bells to you, the broker, as well. So the client has described themselves as an interior designer, and they've input fees of $150,000 for the last financial year. However, the client has also indicated that they are involved in manufacturing, construction, erection, or installation, and also the supply of materials, plant goods, or equipment. So now when we think back to Kim's explanation and description of the supply of goods exclusion contained in a normal PI policy wording, then we know that if we ignored this information from the client and didn't ask any further information, then we run the risk of placing this client under the architect's PI wording, and they could potentially have a massive gap in their coverage. So when we go back to the income noted, if the client is involved in construction, then the client has likely only declared what they perceive as being their fee income or their billed fee income for those professional services. You should go back to the client if they've answered any of these questions in the affirmative and ask for more details on the work that they are actually doing, including what materials they are supplying and what construction work they might be involved in. So once you have that information, you can then confirm with the client what their turnover is, you know, or what the total billings might be for those complete activities, not just their perceived fee income. So we do include these questions on the architect and engineer's PI proposal form, so that it opens up that conversation, and you know, we are made aware of perhaps a difference in the activities noted on the prop to what the client is actually doing, and we can ensure as underwriters and brokers that they are placed under the correct wording. So I would say that interior designers are probably a particularly tricky profession, as in my experience, I've seen that the business can quickly evolve to being involved in construction work or even importing of furniture and soft furnishings from abroad. So I've even had a few interior design clients who have started their own candle manufacturing. So this is why they've answered the supply of goods question in the affirmative, and it just needed a bit of a closer inspection on their activities. So I would say that when you have a client who's currently written under the engineer's PI wording or the architect's wording, that you investigate their activities on a yearly basis just to make sure that the wording you've placed them under initially is still suitable for them. So in this, this one example that we have here, when you went back to the client, it actually emerges that they are an interior fit out and renovations company, and they are turning over $5 million per annum. And so we asked them to complete the D&C proposal form. You would be surprised at the amount of times this actually happens. If you are familiar with D&C, then you're also going to be familiar with the question set that I have here on the screen. So this question set on the D&C proposal form is probably the most important question on that proposal form. So we really rely on it quite heavily when it comes to deciding what premium we quote for the client and what rating we're using. So you should make sure, if there's anything you walk away with from this presentation, you should make sure that you are comfortable in what information this question is requesting. So D&C is generally rated by assigning a rate to the portion of the client's turnover that has varying PI exposure. So we're asking for the client's total turnover, not a nominal fee. The Berkeley underwriter that you speak to will generally compare the turnover with the number of employees also to ensure that the information we are getting on this proposal form is true. So this is why the D&C prop also asks for information on the number of employees. For example, if your client is stating that they are turning over $500,000 and they're also stating that they have 20 employees, then we know that there's something not quite right there. So we're going to ask more information. So recently, over the last couple of years, we've also been asking for financial statements, and this has helped us and brokers immensely in making sure that the turnover stipulated on the proposal form from the client is actually true. So I'm just going to go into what each of these sections is actually asking for and what sort of information you need to be putting in there. So section 1.1 is asking for the percentage of turnover for projects where design is done in-house. So in other words, your client cannot recover from anyone else if there's an error with the advice or design provided. And if we typically see turnover noted in this field, we'll sometimes ask for more information on what the experience and the profession of that person is. We just want to make sure if this is being done in-house that they have a suitably qualified person doing that design or advice. Section 1.2 is asking for the percentage of turnover for projects where design or professional work is contracted out. So you have two options here, and of course our preference is that the work is being assigned to a professional that also holds PI insurance so that we may be able to recover from them. So if you have ever been involved in a D&C claim situation, you will know that there is often many parties involved, and of course no one thinks that they are responsible. Now, if we know that the person who may have been responsible for the design or advice error, then we can focus on instead assisting the client in recovering from that person. Section 1.3 is asking for the percentage of turnover where the client is conducting design only and they're not involved in any actual construction, installation or manufacture. So for example, this might be where an in-house architect is providing a home design only and the client is not responsible for any construction or supply of materials in that project. 1.4 then asks for turnover for projects where the client is only involved in the actual construction. So the client is not providing any design, and importantly, that they are not providing any amendments to any design. So they are simply handed the designs and they proceed to construct or manufacture. If the client is making any changes to the design at all, then this turnover cannot be noted in this field. It should be either allocated to 1.1 or 1.2. So we still often get this section completed incorrectly. So for example, if the client thinks that they are paying an engineer $20,000 for engineering work on a project, they sometimes think that this is the only figure that they need to input in section 1.2. However, if they are engaging an engineer, external engineer at all on that project, then they need to input the entire turnover for that project in section 1.2, not just the fees they are paying to the external design or advice. So it can take a while to fully understand what turnover should be noted on this section, but if you're in doubt, you should just contact your Berkeley underwriter. We'd be happy to assist you. Or you can also just explain the situation in your submission to us. So I did receive a submission last week where the broker explained in her email that all third-party design, or all designs were signed off by an external engineer. And then when I looked into the proposal form, the client had noted 100% of their turnover in the construction only. So because of the additional information the broker had provided to me, I understood exactly how I needed to rate for this client. So a common question that we do get from brokers is asking us why a client needs D&C coverage if they are constructing only. So it is a greatly reduced exposure, and we do rate for that accordingly. If the client is constructing only, then a claim can still come against them for a failure to warn. So they do have a duty to warn their principal if the design is inadequate or not designed very well. In their professional capacity as builders, they would have knowledge, of course, and experience in knowing if a design that has been given to them is incorrect. And if they proceed to build without providing a warning, then that's the exposure for this sort of client. So to use a claims example here, a builder was engaged to build a multi-level car park. So they built the ground floor, and then when they started building the second floor, they realized that the pylons provided on the designs given to them, the pylons on the first floor and the second floor didn't match up. So they knew that if they had followed those plans, that the building might have collapsed. They didn't warn anyone. And unfortunately, that building did collapse, and the court found that the construction-only builder was liable due to their failure to warn the principal that there was an inadequate design provided. So now moving on to underwriting considerations. We do look at D&C very differently from what we would look at for PI. So I guess the three main things we look at in terms of projects, we would be looking at the types of projects being undertaken. We look at the values of their largest contracts, and we also will be looking at the lengths of those projects. So that's why we ask for this information in the D&C proposal form. So it goes without saying that the potential for loss for a $10 million project is much more than 10 projects being undertaken at $1 million each. And we also find that the longer the project, the higher the risk the client has due to an increased exposure to emerging regulations and conditions over time. So we've seen this fairly recently with the explosion in materials and supply costs, and a lot of builders had agreed to fixed contracts, and this brought about a complete collapse in terms of the construction industry. So when we're looking at the projects being undertaken, we're also looking for repetitive design. For example, if your client is engaged to design and construct 20 townhouses, then it's, goes without saying that some of these homes are being built using the same designs. If there is an error in that initial design, then that's only going to be replicated several times and increases the loss exposure for the client. So this is also why we're not super keen on any high-rise work or development work due to that exposure. So I've also got a claims example here when it comes to sort of high-rise work and why we're not massively keen on that area. So this claim example arose from the design and construction of a combined apartment and retail space. So it was alleged that the insured's design of the window glazing system was non-compliant. The non-compliant glazing allowed an unacceptable level of external noise to enter the apartments. So the rectification costs for this claim were $1.2 million, and there was also costs of $60,000 involved. So this fell under the D&C policy. So if you can consider those massive rectification costs, and then what the rectification costs would have been for maybe one unit or one house with the same error. Also, if you consider that this was a high-rise building, what could the rectification costs have been if there had been more than just the Windows error? If there'd been multiple errors and inconsistencies, then that cost would have just exploded. So leading on from this, you should really speak to your client about what their largest projects are and what their maximum loss exposure might be. So you should also explain to them that generally a D&C limit is cost inclusive. So D&C claims tend to be expensive, drawn out claims, and this is because they usually involve the use of expensive subject matter experts. So also consider this when determining an appropriate limit for your client. So leading on from this, we do like to look at clients with a great history. So if your client has been trading for 20 years and undertaken hundreds of projects, then you should let your underwriter know about that. And that will help swing things into your client's favor when it comes to seeking the best terms from the market. So one thing we do look at as underwriters when it comes to D&C is the quality of the submission. So if the client is not taking any care in their submission, then it goes without saying that they may not be taking the necessary care involved when they're building a $10 million building. So some additional things that you might be able to include with your submission. And it's important to remind your client that the submission and proposal form is really an opportunity for them to let us know why they are a good risk. You can include things like resumes, awards, some brochures, websites. However, I should note here that before you release the submission to your underwriters, you should be reviewing the website, because we do find, particularly with construction risks, they tend to exaggerate their past work or skills on that website in order to help them win contracts. So if there is a discrepancy with what's on the website and what's being submitted to the underwriter, you should be prepared to have that information ready for the underwriter, because undoubtedly, if there's a website, we always look at it. And if we see a difference between the information there and the information on the proposal form, then we're just going to become uneasy about the risk. Finally, we are asking for financials, of course, when it comes to D&C risks. We do get asked why we are asking for financials, but everyone should be aware at this stage that the construction industry does operate on razor thin margins. So a good construction risk we see in terms of financials may only have a 2% profit margin, and that's a good financial risk for D&C. So of course, this is far below what we would see as an average profit margin across all sectors. So the problem leading on from low net profit margins is then cash flow problems from debtors. And this is, of course, compounded again by the rising levels of insolvencies in the construction space. So to give you an example, in the 9 months to March 2024, insolvency data showed that almost 8,000 companies entered administration, and more than a quarter of these companies were construction related. Construction insolvencies in March alone were the second highest on record. So while material costs are stabilizing, the industry is still seeing really high labor costs and shortages continuing to impact the bottom line. So the simple fact is that a client in financial distress has a higher likelihood of a D&C claim, as they may cut costs or corners during the construction. In March 2023, for example, Porter Davis, as you may remember, which was Australia's 13th largest home builder at the time, entered administration with outstanding debts of almost 150 million, and they had $70 million in unsecured creditors. So liquidators did highlight at the time that there was a massive issue in Porter Davis's practices, and that was that they were delaying the purchase of homeowners' building insurance until after work permits were secured, as opposed to placing those policies upon receipt of the deposit from the homeowners. So this practice left about 800 customers unprotected, having paid deposits before that insurance was actually in place. So I'm going to be finishing up with a quick Slido. And the question we will be asking is, would a construction company written under a standard consulting engineer's policy be covered for incorrect slab or foundation designs? And we are stating here that the client is also constructing those designs. So while we wait for that to come in, did any of the other underwriters have any underwriting considerations they wanted to add?
Not really, Beck. More about industry, I suppose. The usual D&C rule as well, but people may have thought that it's mainly for construction building companies. There's all kinds of companies out there that manufacture and construct, so it doesn't have to be the home builder or the residential builder. But the usual D&C considerations when it comes to marine risks, rail risk, air risk, always problematic and tricky areas for D&C underwriters.
Thanks for that, Jason. Okay, we've gotten already quite a few responses on this. So majority of you, 87% have answered this one correctly. So we can assume that that no, this would not be covered under a standard consulting engineer's policy because, of course, that supply of goods exclusion that Kim mentioned earlier, they would not be covered for any actual construction of anything. All right, I'm just going to hand it off to Chris now for some more claims examples.
Thanks, Beck. There were some great insights there around those underwriting considerations. So I'm going to take you through a few more claims examples now. So for claim example 3, this was a claim where indemnity was granted. The insured was a D&C contractor who was engaged to design and construct some residential apartments. Following construction completion, the insured was made aware of a potential circumstance. The claimant alleged that due to certain delays in the preparation and provision of design packages, that they had suffered a financial loss with project costings exceeding the allocated construction budget. The claimant alleged that the insured failed to properly perform its design obligations, including failing to conduct all necessary tasks to design and specify the works appropriately or in compliance with the project milestones for completion of those tasks. They also failed to review consultant documentation to ensure that the designs met project requirements. The insured notified the circumstance within the policy period and the indemnity was subsequently granted. The matter was ultimately settled for approximately $2 million, and that included expenses. So a fairly costly one there. Next slide, please. So our next example is a matter where there were multiple claims that arose under the same project, where some matters were indemnified and some that fell outside the scope of the policy. So the insured was a custom residential designer and builder operating in the southwest of WA. The claimant contracted the insured to build a custom high specification home to the value of around $2 million. The construction took place between September 16 and December 2019. The claimant alleged a number of defects in the insured's construction of the property and accordingly sought compensation. In support of the alleged defects, the claimant obtained an independent building inspection report, and the report identified defects with the works which related to the listed areas there. So inadequate roof tie downs, concrete paving falls, window reveal, sill moisture, a carport roof leak, a pool leak, some rusting of some soft lining nails, the metal surrounds of the fireplace, balcony waterproofing, and some wall bracing. The claim had been made by the claimant, which met the definition within the wording. The matter fell within the policy's insuring clause, which indemnifies the insured against civil liability for compensation, including legal costs and expenses arising from any claim first made against the insured during the policy period and arising out of a breach of professional duty by the insured in their exercise and conduct of the activities and duties. Exclusion 6.24, defective workmanship and materials, was also considered. The clause excludes indemnity in respect of any claim directly or indirectly arising out of, related to, or in connection with any defective workmanship or defective materials relating to physical work, so construction, erection, installation, etc., to buildings, property, goods, or products. So the insured faced 9 claims for defects as listed there on the slide. In consideration of these noted policy sections, it was determined that claim 1 amounted to a breach of a design obligation and indemnity was granted. Claims 2 through 8 were marked by issues of defective workmanship or defective materials and therefore fell outside of the policy coverage. And claim 9, which was finally balanced, but determined that it arose from a failure in the provision of construction management. So indemnity was granted for claims 1 and claims 9, and the matter was finalised and settled with approximately $40,000 paid, including expenses. Next slide, please. So our final claims example was a claim where indemnity was granted. The insured was a commercial builder and was engaged by the third party to supply and install suspended post-tension concrete slabs to a rooftop car park of a high-rise building. Following completion of the contract, the suspended concrete slab began to crack, which led to an ingress of water, and the water subsequently travelled through the cracks in the slab and down to the below level, damaging the floor. It was alleged that the cracks occurred due to tolerances in the post-tension concrete slab exceeding its limits, and rectification of the suspended slab was required, as well as fixing the damaged floor on the below level. The insured notified Berkeley of this circumstance within the policy period, and based on being a specification error, indemnity was granted and the matter was ultimately settled with approximately $2.6 million paid, which included expenses, so a fairly costly one there. So that ends the claims examples today. Hopefully these examples provided some insights into the types of claims that we see under our D&C policy, as well as give you an indication of how expensive some of these D&C claims can be. I will now pass over to Steve for our Q&A section. Steve.
Thanks, Chris. We've had quite a few questions come through. Those that we can't answer now, we will be providing formal responses and sending out along with the webinar in the next couple of days. First off the bat, Jason, question for you. Thank you, Tina, for this question. If you're a building construction firm, constructing your own developments, i.e. purchase the land and build and sell off the properties, however you outsource the design aspect of this, why is the design and construct so hard to obtain?
Well, first of all, for property developers, generally most D&C insurers stay away from owner property developers because they've generally got financial interest and they do get messy. So if it is a development that they've done themselves and then outsourced, there is exposure we could consider, but generally as a rule of thumb, most D&C underwriters steer clear of property development exposure.
Thanks, Jace. Kimberly, a question for you, and thank you, Trevor, for this one. What if the design is done in-house, but signed off by a third party, Kimberly, what section of the proposal form would this go under? So design done in-house, however, signed off by a third party.
We would probably look at placing that turnover split percentage under 1.2 of the proposal form. So,
wonderful. Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks, John, for this question. One for you, Beck. Would you consider 100% turnover under section 1.2 and nothing under section 1.1, i.e. the building contract out all design, but the D&C contract sits with the client?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is pretty common. So yeah, we do write these risks.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And thanks, Daryl, for this question. One for you, Chris. Is this cover suitable for the trades like electrical contractors? I'll add in there plumbers, for example, who are purely following drawings and not providing any advice.
Yes, we do write tradies and plumbers and the like under our D&C wording. So yes, that policy would be applicable.
Thank you very much. Another couple coming through. Thanks, Elise. Do you offer a combined PI and PL for D&C? We don't offer a combined PI and PL for D&C. We'd have to consider these standalone. Often the PL for a construction company can be placed under a contract works policy. Thank you, Daniel, for your question. Is your D&C product available on Bind It? Unfortunately, due to the complexity of a D&C risk, we have to underwrite that open market. Careful considerations by underwriters, as have been explained by the guys. So unfortunately, we can't sort of see these as being auto-rated anytime soon. I think probably leave it there for the questions. There's a couple more that have come through. Again, we'll look to address all of these and provide formal responses to ensure that all of the questions are answered. So any that we haven't got to or missed, we will respond to you shortly and send out all the details. Chris, back over to you, mate, for a bit of a wrap up.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so that pretty much brings us to the end of the webinar today. Before we go, we just wanted to highlight some upcoming events that we have. So you will see there on your screen. We've got some product training events happening over the next few months in Victoria, Queensland, and SA. We'll be talking over a number of topics, including a deep dive into our online Bind It quoting platform, some PL and some management liability, some talks around IT liability in terms of what's changed and what our target business looks like. Some more insights around D&C, so probably a good piece off the back of this webinar. And you'll also get a chance to engage with your seasoned underwriters at these events. We also have the next webinar in our webinar series coming up around this time next month, where we will be talking all things management liability. So for details of the webinar and all of these events, please jump on the Berkeley Insurance Australia website, where you'll find the information as well as the registration for those events. For anyone who didn't get a chance to ask a question today or didn't feel comfortable raising it in this form, please reach out to your dedicated underwriters and we will be happy to talk through any topics that you have to discuss. So once again, thank you everyone for attending today. It's been a great turnout. Hopefully you took some insights away from this and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.